Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I hope we can have a fun discussion today. We're going to be talking about deception. And you may or may not have heard, but there's a presidential election taking place in which that's something of an issue. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. What we're going to focus on, though, is a very old human phenomenon, deception and trust, and how new technologies that we're developing are sort of interacting and shaping the way we lie and trust each other. So that's the whole talk today. I'm happy to take questions, and we'll do some interactive exercises throughout the hour. So feel free to shout things out. We don't need to wait until the end. Now, there's lots of ways in which you can think technology can increase and facilitate lying. Here's an example of one. This is Instagram. It says here, probably the best Snapchat I've ever sent. It says here, so nice to chill by the pool. Looks like a nice shot. Maybe, people bragging on social media. In fact, it's a person's put their two fingers up in front of a monitor and taken a picture, so it looks like it's their knees in front of a pool, right? So it's a cute little deception. And we see these kind of things all the time. You can see more serious, business-related ones. So online reviews are used all the time by people. But when we ask people, do you have any concerns about relying on reviews? The number one concern people have is that they're fake. And indeed, companies are working really hard on trying to reduce and identify fake reviews. Technology has also played a big role in one of the big scandals of the last decade. How many people know the VW crisis? Okay, so most of you know, but it's one of my favorite deceptions. So basically, VW engineers programmed a car to lie to inspectors. So the car is going along, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm getting tested. And so once it realized it was being tested, it changed its behavior. And it wasn't just one car, it was millions. So we see human engineers designing deception into technology at scale. It's really fascinating. Now, all those examples can maybe lead you to think like deception is a really big problem now. And a lot of the things that I read about worry that we're more deceptive now than ever and that social media plays a big part of that. It's not clear, but I can tell you that pretty much every generation thinks that the prior generations were more honest, and that we're currently more deceptive than everybody else. So you go to the 90s and people are like, oh man, back in the 80s, that was like the good, honest times. In the 80s, they're like, oh my God, it's so deceptive now, the 70s. And you can go all the way back, way, way back. Does anybody recognize who this guy is? Any classicists amongst us? Diogenes, and he's got his lantern. What is he looking for? A single honest man. And he dies without ever finding one, so the story goes, right? It's a very uplifting story. So even the Greeks 2,000 years ago had the same feeling we have right now, that we are no longer an honest culture, an honest society. The prior generations were more honest. And it's not just Western culture either. The first documentation of a lie detector test was with the Chinese about 2,000 years ago as well. They'd put rice into somebody's mouth that they suspected was lying, because they thought that if they were lying, they wouldn't have any saliva and they wouldn't be able to talk. So both Western, Eastern cultures, all the way back through recorded history, have been worried about deception and that we're more deceptive than ever. So I don't think we're more deceptive than ever, but it's not clear. All I know is that my history with deception is not quite as old, but here's me in the 90s. I was a customs officer in Canada. You may still hear some accent. I've been in the States for about 14 years now, but I still got the oots and outs and things like that. And I protected the Canadian border from, you mean Americans bringing in all your contraband. You can see that bulge on my waist there. You might think that's my weapon. In fact, that's my stamp, because that's how we do things in Canada. We just welcome people with stamps, not guns. There's one other thing you might notice there. There was a telephone. So the years I was working, they introduced the possibility of having a boat come to a remote dock on the British Columbia coastline, and they could call in and ask for clearance. And very controversial. People were like, how can you tell if the person's lying? Like, how do you know anything about them if it's on the phone? And so that was an example of how technology and trust were starting to bump up against each other. So we're going to dive into this very question, right? Like, how do those things come together? And to do that, we need to start with a little definition work. So a lie, or to deceive, is an intentional attempt to mislead someone. Two pieces. The second piece, misleading, means you're trying to create a false belief in somebody else, and that false belief is a belief that you believe to be not true, okay? So you're trying to get somebody to believe something that you believe not to be true, and you're doing that on purpose, because you can get people to believe the wrong thing by accident, right? If I told you the talk was at 3:30, and I really believed that, I could create a false belief in you, but not intentionally. Great. Okay, so what I want to do is show you some examples that my lab's been working on where we've sort of found some interesting deceptions that technology has played a role in sort of promoting. And we've given them cute names. Those are the butlers, the sock puppets, and the Chinese water army. Yes, ma'am?
There's about 100 people out there who think they're not supposed to come in because there's a sign on the door.
Wow.
Maybe we should let them in.
Okay. How is it that these people made it in here? These are the cheaters. You guys, oh, very impressive. I like that. That's what we want. The innovators are in here. Right.
It's your early adopters.
It's early adopters, yes. That's great. Here's the question, do we give them the intro, or do we just start right off from here, right? Just start. While we're waiting for them, did you ever hear about the Ashley Madison scandal? Okay, so basic idea is this company was letting married men cheat on their wives. So they wanted married men. And it got hacked, and all these names were released with emails. And the cool thing is, two economists analyzed all the emails for what company they were in. And if they were in a company, they would count that company as having a cheater. So the more cheaters at a company, they wanted to know, did the company cheat more? And they measured it and found that the more cheaters in AshleyMadison.com a company had, the more class action lawsuits against them, the more they had to restate quarterly earnings. But also, the more patents the companies had. So companies with cheaters, they tend to get sued a little bit more, but they innovate and are more creative. So it's a double-edged sword. All right, we'll just keep plowing through, and they can catch the exciting second half of the talk. So let's talk about these three kinds of lies. The first is the butler. Now, has any of you ever received the message, "on my way"? All right, well, then you probably were lied to. So almost every time we've recorded people saying "on my way," so we get them to look at all their texts, and they say "on my way" to somebody, they admit that they weren't really on their way, right? They were just out of the shower, or they were thinking of leaving, or they're getting ready to leave. Another example is, "sorry, my phone was dead," when they didn't respond to you. That also probably was false. Or "got work, gotta go." So these all are examples of a particular kind of lie around something called micro-coordination. Most of the time we're using texting to coordinate other social interactions. And the reason we call these Butler lies is we think they're like a buffer in reaction to the design of communication technology, which has been to create communication so that it's as easy as possible, right? Once you have my digits, you can contact me anytime, anywhere. And so these Butler lies are a way of creating a buffer between me and people that can contact me at any time. And the reason we sometimes have to lie is I may really like the person that wants to talk to me or wants to meet with me. I just don't want to meet with them right then. So I respect our relationship. I want to keep our relationship good. And so sometimes I'll just lie and make up an excuse for why I don't want to talk to them rather than saying, "I don't want to talk to you right now," right? Which can be difficult. So we see these, they make up about 3% of all text messages, which seems very small, but when you multiply that by, university students send about 100 a day. There's about 5 or 6 billion sent in the US a day, and you multiply that by any small percentage, and it's a fair number of these things. So we're using them to create a buffer. All right, here's another one, The Sock Puppet, book here by R.J. Ellery, Quiet Vendetta. Here's a reviewer on Amazon, Nicodemus Jones, very positive review. I like the bottom one there. Whatever else it might do, it will touch your soul. If you want to leave a review for this talk, feel free to use that language there. And because we're talking about deception, you're probably guessing that those are the same people. Okay? Nicodemus Jones was R.J. Ellery. He was busted by a journalist. And there was a whole scandal over the last 2 years of British authors getting caught doing this. So they all signed, about 400 British authors signed a manifesto saying, hey, we shouldn't do this. And what this is identity deception, right? So if R.J. Ellery was in the room with us, he couldn't say, hey, I'm Nicodemus Jones, and I think you should read R.J. Ellery, my book, because it's really good, right? Just physically it doesn't work. But when we get into an online environment, identity deception is very easy, although not brand new. So Walt Whitman was infamous for doing these kinds of things. Whenever he had new collections coming out, he would write letters to editors of newspapers all around the country talking about how great his book was using pseudonyms. But what is new is the scale at which it can be done. And so we see these things like the Chinese Water Army, or what's referred to here in the US as astroturfing, in which you can pay many people a small amount of money to say or do a lie for you. Okay? So one example are all those fake reviews. So the number one way that you can get fake reviews or fake likes on your page or fake followers on Twitter is you pay for them, right? And so you can buy followers on Twitter for about 10 cents a follower. You can pay for fake reviews. It costs about 50 cents to $5 depending on what kind of review you want, right? So there's markets for these. We also see in the election, our colleagues at the Oxford Internet Institute identified bots. So you can also buy accounts on social media that are bots. So this botnet that was supporting Trump was about 400,000 bots. And so you could basically buy that small army and get it to do things. In China, my colleague here in the comm department at Stanford analyzed all the hacked emails from a Chinese prefecture and discovered that most employees in the government that work in an information job, every week they have a responsibility to say something positive about China and China's government, right? It's like a form of propaganda that they have, that's just part of their job. And they don't use their identity of like, I'm a government worker, I'm going to say the government's awesome. They go on as private citizens saying how amazing China is, and that's part of their job. Okay? So you see these kind of large-scale, small deceptions. Now, with all that I've just showed you, you might be kind of worried again that like, yeah, maybe actually technology is making us more deceptive. And it certainly affords some kinds of deception. But when we've studied the way that we interact with people that we know, we actually see a very different story. So I'm going to show you some studies about communication with friends, family, coworkers. That makes up about 95% of the communication we have online. And you'll see that we have a very different story. So we're excluding the Nigerian prince with all that money. That guy is indeed lying to you, okay? We're talking about people that you know. The first one is, where do you think we lie the most? Face-to-face, on the telephone, on the phone like this, or saying email, okay? Get you guys to think about it for a sec. Let's imagine that you can control for the fact that we talk still more face-to-face than any of the other media. But imagine you could control for that. Where do you think people lie the most? How many people think face-to-face? Okay, a couple people. How many people think the phone? A couple people. How many people think email? All right, most of the people. All right, great. Now, for the email people, since you're the most, why do you think we lie most there? Okay, so there's no personal interaction, right? And yes? You can edit it. Very good. Did you have the same idea? You can read it over and double check it. Very good. Yeah, you guys? Okay, it's emotionally flat. Time shifted, so you can send and receive anytime you want. Very good. All right, so those are really good answers. When we ask people questions like that, those are a lot of the types of things that people talk about. In fact, and I wouldn't be talking about it, you're all wrong. It turns out email between people that know each other is the most honest of media. Why might that be? What of those features that were said there what features missed about email? Yeah. It leaves a really, really permanent record. Not only a record for myself, I literally give the lie to the liar, right? Now, if you think of almost any political scandal in the last couple of weeks, all the way back to, say, 15 years ago, it has something to do with a record left with technology, right? So Email, we're looking at the WikiLeaks hacks with Clinton. The video that changed the course of the election was a record of a conversation. But we can go all the way back to divorce, say. In 2008 is when New York State divorce cases had more in which there was email or text than were not as the primary source of evidence. Okay? So doing anything in a text-based environment as a lie is probably a bad idea. Also speaking really truthfully about things that you don't want other people to know, also a bad idea. Okay? So the record, if there's going to be one thing you leave today with, I think this record is the number one thing that's changing the way we lie and trust one another. Okay. All right. Talk a lot about Facebook. People often have very negative feelings towards it, about it being deceptive and narcissistic, and people just putting up positive things that aren't really authentic representation of themselves. And I think that also is wrong. And I'll tell you why. We have, this was a study that we did, but some colleagues did. It's Richard. So let's say Richard and I are very good friends, okay? And I'm going to get, what's your name? Kylie? Heidi. Heidi over here. And what's your name, sir? Dawn. Okay, so we got Heidi and Dawn. They don't know Richard. I know Richard really well. And I'm going to analyze Richard's personality. He's a gregarious, extroverted guy, conscientious, but low on neuroticism, okay? And I let Heidi talk to Richard for 3 minutes. And then afterwards, she also assesses Richard's personality along the things I just said. And we let Doug analyze Richard's personality, but only gets to meet Richard through looking at his Facebook profile. Never actually interacts or sees him in person. Their personality assessments are exactly the same and have the same accuracy relative to mine. Meeting somebody via their Facebook profile or meeting them face-to-face. Now, why is that? Why do you guys think that Facebook might actually be more honest than we think? What is it that is the special thing about Facebook compared to, say, email or any other way of interacting? Photos. Photos are really important. We get lots of information out of photos, even ones that are highly selected. Yeah? Yeah, so there's also a network. And the network acts as a constraint on deception. So when we looked at resumes, we found that online resumes, like on LinkedIn, are more honest about the things employers care about, like responsibilities, how long they've been in a job, and skill sets, than paper resumes. Okay? And the same reason, the people that know the information and who you care a lot about how they perceive you, they have access to that. So we argue that the networks actually act as a big constraint on the way that people lie. We can also look at online dating. I'm sure none of you do online dating, but some of your friends do, right? The cool thing about online dating is you say something about yourself in the world, and then we can bring you into the lab and measure it and get some ground truth. So in this study, what we did is we took the information off of their profile. Here's how tall some men said they were on their profile. And when we brought them in the lab and measured them up against the wall, here's how tall they actually were, okay? If their dot fell on this diagonal line, they were totally accurate about what their height was. And if it was below, then they were saying they were taller than they actually were. And look at, all the men are lying pretty much by saying they're taller than they actually were. It's about 9/10 of an inch on average, or what my group calls strong rounding up. So you get, you're like 5'7" and 1/10 of an inch. You're like 5'8". You're good, right? Now, why are the men doing this? Is technology causing them to lie, do you think? Why are they all doing this? It's more desirable to be a taller person, is exactly right. So women prefer taller men, okay? It's not like that this woman prefers taller women. It's like on average. And there's a psychological explanation for this that goes back using evolution, which is the taller, bigger guy was more likely to get resources into the cave, right? And if you look at the popular vote in American history for president, the taller man almost always wins. It's not 100%, but it's about 90, 95%. So men know that, and that's why they lie like this. Now we might think, aha, well the online dating is letting them do that. But let's look at all of the men's shoes out here today. Here's mine. And it's not quite 9/10 of an inch, but it's pretty darn close. And if you go to a men's shoe store, the average height of the heel of a man's shoe is about 9/10 of an inch. So it's not online dating that's causing them to lie. They're doing exactly what they do face to face. And it's because they are trying to present themselves attractively to women. Now, we can look at women and weight. Here is how heavy they said they were in a profile, and now, this is 2008. After our study came out, women are no longer asked about their weight on online dating profiles, but they are asked about body shapes and things like that. Here's how heavy they said they were. And look, the patterns are very different. So for women, when we were looking at their height, it was some were taller and above the line, some below the line. It was pretty random. Women here are not acting like the men, where all of them lied about the same amount. Women here, you can see as they get bigger, they lie more. Okay? Now, it turns out that it's not the technology causing them to do this either. Men are attracted to hourglass figure women. This preference for hourglass figure women is very old. There's evidence of it in poetry in the 15th and 16th century, so go back a long time. So men tend to prefer younger, slimmer women. Why? Is it because of technology? No. It's because, according to evolutionary psychology, men are looking for fertile women in order to pass on their genes, okay? So in the same way that women have preferences for some kinds of men on average, men have preferences for some kind of women on average. And indeed, we find that women will lie more often about how old their photos are, so they tend to put versions of themselves, of photos taken more years ago than men do. Shots with their hair being more fuller, face. Again, is this technology? No. We can look into the beauty industries. Some women pay far much more money for beauty products than men. And not a small, trivial amount of money. The hair and makeup industries are multi-billion-dollar industries, right? So we're always trying to present our best selves, but technology allows us to track how that takes place. Also notice that these individuals could say whatever they want. I could say on an online dating profile that I'm 6'5", and I'm very wealthy, and make it up, right? So why aren't they doing that? Most of the lies here you can see, though frequent, are very subtle. Why? Somebody that feels confident, go ahead and shout it out. You're going to meet them, right? You won't get past coffee. And often with online dating, you want to get past coffee to another room, right, in which you want to pass on your genes. All right, if we think about this in purely evolutionary terms. And indeed, if the person, when you sit down at coffee and like, I'm not 6'5", and I'm not extraordinarily wealthy, then that's it. That is the end of the story. I've been judged a liar, which is possibly one of the worst things to be judged as a human. So it's game over. So they're also constrained by the fact that they're trying to do something in the world, which is to have a relationship with somebody. So people don't just start lying with technology just because they can, but people lie for a reason. All right, well, speaking of lying, we've looked at how technology can shape the way people do that, but what about, detecting it? How is it that people go about lying? So to look at that, I want to do an experiment with you guys, okay? And to do this experiment, we need to choose a partner. All right, so everybody choose a partner. It can be somebody you know or meet somebody new. All right, does anybody need a partner? Kind of working it out? I'll tell you what, you three over there, you guys have one person, and the other two people will be listening to your story, okay? Now, you also need to decide who has the lighter colored shirt. When I do this in New York City, this never works because they're all wearing black. Okay, so you figure out who has the lighter colored shirt, and that person, I want you to start thinking about a trip you went on recently, okay? Now, the dark colored shirt, I want you to close your eyes. Consider it a trust exercise. You're in a safe place. Close your eyes. Don't open them until I explicitly tell you to open them, okay? So you recall, I study deception. I will find you if you peek. All right, so dark shirt, eyes are closed. Light shirts, you have some instructions on the stage. Okay, so. All right, does everybody feel good about their instructions? All right, great. Okay, dark-colored shirts, thank you for trusting us. You may open your eyes. Light-colored shirts, please tell your partner a story about a trip you went on recently. You have 1 minute. Okay, about 10 more seconds. All right, great. Wrap up your stories. Thank you for sharing them. All right, now, as you may guess, the black, darker colored shirts have a job to do. Your job is to try and tell if your partner was lying to you about their story. All right? So your job is now to try and determine if your partner lied to you. This is called a non-interrogation deception detection task. So think back to what just happened, and you're going to raise your hand if you think your partner was lying, and then just keep it up, okay? Ready? Who thinks their partner was lying to them? All right, keep them up. All right. And here were the instructions. And so if you're on this far side of the room, if your hand is up, you were right. Correct, correct, correct. Were you on that side of the room? Okay. No, he wasn't telling a lie? Good, you were telling the truth, right? So this side of the I split them here, basically. Okay? Now, the people with your hands up over here, there's 2 on this side. Okay, so you guys were wrong, and you're also mean, cynical, horrible, horrible people. So we had about 4 people that were right on this side, right? Is that roughly 4 or 5? We had 2 who were wrong on this side of the room, okay? Now, it's interesting because that means that most of the people on this side of the room were wrong. Only a couple people were right, 4. On this side of the room, only a couple people were wrong. Most people were right. Now, why is it that this side of the room was better at deception detection than this side of the room? This side of the room was really good. This side of the room kind of sucked. Why?
Everyone assumed they were telling the truth.
Exactly right. Everybody assumes that everybody else is telling the truth, okay? This is something called the truth. Well, you didn't, because you're a mean and cynical person. And we are in a talk about deception, right? I mean, it's a decent guess. You're right. So the strongest and only reliable effect in about 50 years of deception detection research is something called the truth bias, okay? It is the only effect we see in every single deception detection study. Our default state is to trust the other person. And most of the time, that is the state we're in. And most of the time, that is exactly the right position to be in. Because most of the time, we are being told the truth. In fact, some have argued that the truth bias is the basis of human communication. And that without it, the way we evolved language, which involves implicature and inference, could not operate without this truth bias, without assuming that your partner is a cooperative partner. Okay? So it's a very powerful effect. Now, of course, there's sometimes reasons to become suspicious, and you move out of that trust default state. And sometimes that's because they've given off some cues, perhaps. What cues did you guys rely on to tell if your partner is lying to you or not? In general, what cues do you use to decide if someone's lying to you? Yeah. The amount of detail in the story, so that's a verbal cue. Very good, yeah. Eye contact, that's a nonverbal cue. Very good, in the back. Facial expressions, yes, that's a nonverbal cue. Things like micro-expressions and things like that. Facial expression, yeah, good. Body language, also nonverbal, yeah. Right, so there was a non-interrogation one, so it turns out questions are very important for deception detection. Hesitation, yeah, so that's a nonverbal one, right? So here's something that's crazy that I'm going to tell you guys, and most people have a really hard time believing this. There is no Pinocchio's nose. There is actually no reliable cue to deception. Facial expressions, not reliable, very small effect size, and meta-analyses over hundreds of studies, thousands of trials. Eye gaze, anything to do with the eyes, pretty much anything, non-predictive of deception. Micro-expressions, body movements. If you average across all deceptions, no nonverbal and no physiological features correlate reliably every time with deception. Yes, ma'am?
Is that true if you baseline a single person and compare their communication styles when they're lying and not lying?
Correct. It's not about the individual. It turns out it's about the context. Right. So when I was a customs officer, if somebody's bringing in a bunch of drugs, and if I catch them, they're going to go to jail, those people will give off some cues. Not 100% of the time, and not every person gives off the same cues. So there's high variance across individuals. There's high variance across contexts. In that case, indeed, when people have very high levels of arousal, which is not always the case with deception, my voice might go up a higher frequency, my pupils will dilate a little bit, but those two things, as an example, are not detectable by human judges. Also, I move my body differently, but also not detectable by human judges. In the back.
What if you know the person really well?
Yep. So that person also knows you really well, right? And so liars are not just giving off cues willy-nilly. They're like, okay, my wife knows me really well, and so it's like a escalating war of deception, if you will. Yes?
Do liars get better when they practice a lot?
Liars can get better when they practice a lot, yes. If you give people time, they will perform better. But most people are really good liars anyways. Yeah. Yes?
Have you ever studied what happens if the person believes their own lie?
Self-deception.
A narcissistic person who's going to believes a lot of things that, yeah, self-deception.
Well, I have some good news and bad news. The first is that we all engage in self-deception. So for instance, we all will die fairly soon, right? But we're all having fun and hanging out here. And so we often deceive ourselves about a good deal of things, and that it looks like it's adaptive. So as we developed self-deception, we actually became probably a more competent species. And some people argue that self-deception is a very key adaptive skill. Bad news is we're self-deceiving ourselves, you know, right? Like we're deceiving ourselves. And so that can sometimes get problematic. So if you believe you're like the smartest person ever, and you put yourself in a situation where you're clearly not, you can, you know, run into trouble. So there's ways in which self-deception can be problematic, and there's ways in which it can be highly adaptive. And it's not just narcissists. Yes?
So I'm really intrigued by perception and its relationship to, you know, perception and telling the truth. Because, you know, for example, I live near the Mount Deer Wildlife Refuge, and when the man was killed and shot, there was a video of that, and the FBI finally decided to release that video because they thought it would like put it to bed that he was reaching for his gun, etc.
Okay.
And they released the video, and there was a whole bunch of people that said it was completely murder.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And then there's this whole group of other people over here
Yeah.
who said absolutely he was reaching for his gun. And I was like, everybody was saying the same exact thing.
Yeah.
So this bias that we have of our, you know, that affects our actual perception
Yep.
is really amazing to me.
Absolutely. And let me hold off on talking about that until we get to the section today on politics and lies. Okay? 'Cause we see some similar things there. Great questions. Great questions. So it turns out that verbal things matter. So the most reliable cues, but again, never 100%, are the words that people say. Somebody mentioned details earlier, so that's important. When you do things where you load people up cognitively, you get them to tell you what happened yesterday, and then tell it backwards. They start to repeat things more. They provide fewer details than a truth teller. So there are ways in which you can look at verbal things, and I'll talk about that. But they're really, even those are not very good and difficult for humans to deal with. And that's why over those hundreds of studies, thousands of trials, our accuracy in detecting deception is 54% on average. Okay. All right, so it's very poor. 4% is statistically higher than 50, but it's effectively chance. Okay. And I can talk offline later if people are interested in why I think that 4% happens. The other thing that was weird about this is people lie for a reason. So those of you that were lied to, I'm sorry, I made them lie to you, okay? So don't be mad at them. But typically in the real world, people lie for a reason. They're using lying is an approach to accomplishing things in the world. Very rarely do people lie for a reason, and there are very few people that do that. So psychopaths and pathological liars make up a very small portion of the population. And even they are usually using it to accomplish something as well. And that's important to think about when we think about technology. Technology is a tool. And I'm going to argue for you guys that it is not causing us to lie more or less, but rather it's like fire, right? It can heat our homes and keep us alive, and it can burn them down, right? Okay. And in fact, I'm going to say that in order to understand how deception and trust are being affected by technology, we have to look way into the past in order to see the future. And we start by looking at where we evolved language. So it's actually difficult to do research on when we first started talking to each other. We don't really know very well. Good evidence that it's been at least 50,000 years ago, but there's been recent estimates of like 450,000 years ago. Well, let's just say 50, okay? If that's the case, there's been about 100 billion humans evolving language for us, right? They've been evolving our brain, our cognitive systems, our emotional systems, and they've been interacting in an environment in which there was no record, right? So it's not until about 5,000 years ago that the first evidence of writing appears. So for all those years, about 45,000 years at least, we've been evolving people in which nothing they ever said left a trace. Every single thing they ever communicated disappeared. No record ever, okay? That's how we as a species evolved. We evolved in a communication environment in which there was no record. And it's really not until about 500 years ago that the printing press was invented. But that didn't get out to most people. It's not until World War II that more people on Earth could read and write than could not. Okay? Now, that's very different than, say, the networked age, which is the era we're in now, maybe 20 years old, maybe 15. How many of you today, it's 3:30 or 4, how many of you have written something down today? You emailed, texted, almost everybody, right? So this small group of people in this room today wrote more and left a record, a greater record than all of human prehistory, all of our evolution, okay? And because of that, we're in this really fascinating flux period where we've evolved in a certain communication environment, and now that environment has radically changed. And because humans have a very strong presentism bias, we always think like the way it is now is the way it's always been and the way it always will, we have a hard time recognizing how radical this change has been for communication and what that means for our brains and for our relationships and for life in general. So we're in a really interesting flux period for deception and trust. I think that politicians, in some ways, are the canary in the coal mine. Much of what they do and say gets recorded, and you can see they often get caught. We're about to be like them. I would say in small n number of years, everything we say and do and who we talk to and who we are with will be recorded by a device we have. And some of it will be for our purposes and some of it will be for other purposes. And so we're about to experience what that's like. And that has lots of implications. But one of them is that all those lies are now recorded. So I was mentioning fake reviews. Well, if you fake a review, instead of just that review disappearing, it leaves a record. And what that means is people like myself and other colleagues here at Stanford that are doing computational social science can analyze lies at scale for the very first time. So here are a couple of reviews, and one of them my research group bought. We paid $1 to somebody called an mTurker. This is a crowdsource platform. And that person was given a web link and asked to write a fake review about the hotel. And the other person, we got that review from hotels.com, which is a verified review site. Okay? Now, it's a little bit small on the screen, but I want to give you guys a minute to read these and just decide which one you think is fake. And let's see if Stanford alumni can beat 54%. All right? You have a 50-50 chance on getting this right. The meta-analyses of thousands of trials of deception detection is 54%. Let's see how we do today. All right, you're about to stay at the James Hotel. You have to decide which one of these do you believe. Who thinks that A is fake? Fake. Which one is fake? If A is fake, about half the room. How many people think B is fake? I'm going to say slightly more said B. I don't know, about 54%. Okay, so thank you for just, validating our research. That's really good. And it's better that Stanford alumni don't underperform, right? That would be bad. Okay, why is this a fake review? Why did you, those of you who got it correct, why did you think it was fake? What were the cues you were looking for here? Yes?
It was too detailed. I shouldn't say too detailed. It was more detailed, and there's also a typo in it.
Okay, so this one was too detailed and it has a typo.
Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, so we were interested in typos. We're like, oh man, is spelling a cue? No, just bad spellers. Yes?
It was so emphatic, so many exclamation points.
Yes, so that's one of the top cues our algorithm picked up. There were too many adjectives. And when we do this and ask them to write negative reviews, they screw it up the other way and they do too many negative adjectives. So that's right.
I believe in A because they actually knew how far the restaurant was from the shopping district.
Yes, so that's a very important cue that the algorithm picked up as well. It turns out our bodies, when we enter a space like this, our bodies are encoding tons of information at an unconscious level. And when we talk about this room versus a room we've never been into, you use prepositions differently. So in this case, there's many more prepositions, so the relation of things to each other in there. It talks about the size of the bathroom and things like that. So that's exactly right. That's a very important cue the algorithm picks up. Yep.
I picked B because they used the name of the hotel twice, and it felt to me like it was someone trying to complete an assignment and make sure that they were getting credit for it. From memory.
Exactly right. That was the number 3 most powerful cue. And we never would have anticipated that. It made no sense. But when we look at it and we've tested it since, that's why. Is people are really trying to emphasize this place. Very good. So there are cues in this data. All verbal. There's no nonverbal here, right? Which was what most of the cues that you all mentioned that you think about when you think about lying. But there are verbal cues here. Now, and we can classify these kind of fake reviews fairly well, over 80%. Now, if we take this algorithm and we apply it to fake reviews written by employees that actually worked at the James Hotel, guess how we do? Terribly. Drops down to about 60%. Because people that have experienced the space, they lie differently because their body's been in the space, so those cues don't work. And they're all going to use the James thing, and they just talk very differently. And if you were to take this algorithm and try and tell if your partner's cheating on you by analyzing their email, guess how it would do? Terribly. If you took this and tried to analyze whether presidents were lying about whether they were taking a nation to war for legit reasons or they were having a personal affair, guess how it would do? Terribly. And that's because there is no Pinocchio's nose. As much as we like to believe it, as much as people sell books called How to Catch a Liar, right, and lie spotting and all this stuff, unless they're talking about a very specific situation and a very specific lie, they're selling you a lie, basically, in my view. All right. Well, speaking of lying, let's talk about some politics. I'm going to talk about a project that we just published this week on CNN. Some of you may have seen it. It was the top story for a couple of days until the election. And it was basically the science of lying in politics. We tried to contextualize it a little bit. So, yes, there's a lot of deception taking place now, but we went back and looked through history. And guess what? There's been lies in pretty much every presidential election. Here in 1960, which is a little bit before social media, This lie was a very big one. It was about Kennedy saying that the Russians have more missiles and are going to have a serious threat. Turned out that that is not true, and then he knew that. History is a great guide for this. Here we have LBJ saying we're not going to take American boys and send them over to Vietnam, when in fact they'd worked up plans to do just that. These are not trivial lies, okay? This is part of that idea of like, wow, they're so deceptive now. Back in the 60s, it was really honest and great. These are really serious lies, right? Okay. Well, what is different about this debate is the frequency with which one of the candidates tells them. Now, I'm going to do an analysis that goes across partisanship. I am Canadian, as you know. Yeah. Yeah. But I do want, right, exactly. I have more friends now that want to move to Canada. It's weird. I do want to be upfront, though, that Canadians tend to be more liberal than Americans, all right? So you guys are still working on this whole healthcare thing. Like, it's crazy, but whatever. But I would like to argue that I don't think that my liberalness of being a Canadian is going to affect this, but I do want you to be able to choose that. Also, there are going to be some people in this room that are going to be voting for Trump, and there are people voting for Clinton. And guess what? That doesn't make them jerks or anything else. They just differ. And I think one of the things Americans need to do is talk more with other people that are voting different than them. Because we're all good people, usually. And just because you're voting for one person doesn't make you evil, okay? So that's where this conversation is going to go. I'm going to try and show you some of the science we've done on this and how we've been careful to try and not be biased. Okay, so we're using PolitiFact data here. And here's what you see at the end of September. Donald Trump claims that he makes, so facts that he claims that can be checked independently, are false at a 70% rate, okay? So mostly false all the way down. And here, Hillary Clinton's at 27%. So there's a big difference. But it could be that PolitiFact and all the other fact checkers come out with pretty much the same numbers, is biased towards Democrats. So we can compare against other Republicans. So the other four, yes?
So you're saying that they say something is true, but 70% of the time Trump is...
Right, so I could say the unemployment rate in Ohio is 18%, and that's false. It's a factually checkable thing that can be verified, and that would be considered false. So we compare against the candidates in the Republican primaries, so Bush, Rubio, Cruz, and Kasich. And on average, they were 20%, okay? You can look at Romney and McCain, and they both were at 25%, okay? So even if there's bias, presumably there's not within a party bias. That'd be very difficult to do. And so even against other Republicans, Donald Trump is substantially higher. 2 to 3 times higher. It's about 2 standard deviations off where the typical Republican politician is. All right. Now, because of this, most large news organizations have decided to note this. For a long time, they weren't sure how to deal with this because they didn't want to be accused of bias. But most of them, in the end, are now like, we have to somehow talk about this, including small independent ones that have never endorsed a Republican before. When they disendorse Trump, the number one reason has been because of the false statements, okay? So I'm trying to be really careful here in saying that, in my view, based on the data, Trump makes false claims at a higher rate, substantially higher rate than any other presidential candidate we've ever seen, okay? Going back to 1960. Yet, there's a puzzle, because this is trustworthiness data. Do you think Donald Trump is honest and trustworthy? Same question for Hillary Clinton. Here's the week in which the poll was taken, a large ABC News poll, and Trump is considered trustworthy and honest 38%, and Clinton is 36%, okay? So we see radically different rates of false statements, and yet the same level of honesty. It's a puzzle. Why might this be? Okay, one is, it could be that fact-checking doesn't matter. We, as a society, aren't used to this fact-checking yet. It's only about 8 or 9 years old where we've been able to have this much very quick, almost in real-time fact-checking. And we might not be integrating that into our assessments yet. Not clear. But that's a possibility. There's these very powerful things called homophily effects, which, if I boil it down, is we like and trust people that look like us. Very old, makes a lot of sense. You're in a cave, there's some dude coming. He looks like you, probably okay. Doesn't look like you, all right, get the bats out, right? So we can imagine why there's evolutionary reasons to have this, but it's the basis, the psychological basis for most racism and sexism, right? And indeed, in this election, we're seeing massive demographic shifts from typical Republican Democrat demographics where white men are voting in polls for Trump at far higher rates than any other Republican candidate, and women are voting for Clinton at much higher rates than ever before. Okay, so it could be that those homophily effects are a big part of that, and I think that they're probably very real. The two candidates speak and communicate very differently. Donald Trump is an amazing communicator. He is absolutely fantastic. He speaks in direct, concrete language. He's very emphatic. He speaks in ways that sound unambiguous, even though there is a lot of ambiguity in what he's saying, but it sounds like he's being really concrete. It's just a very direct and honest sounding communication style. Hillary Clinton is not like that. Hillary Clinton speaks in much more qualified terms, more nuanced, longer sentences, and more of them. So as an example, she was asked by an interviewer, can we trust you? All right? What most every human, and certainly politician, should say is, yes. And it took her about 3 sentences, okay? That is not a honest and trustworthy way of communicating. So that could be working here too. There's been a 10-year low. So for the last 10 years, there's been a real decline in trust by Americans in their institutions. Government, church, the media, corporations, okay? So Americans appear to be trusting institutions less. And Hillary Clinton is from one of those institutions, so she might be bumping up against this societal level distrust. And Donald Trump indeed argues that he's outside of that system, and so that might be why he's able to match her. Those, I think, are all playing here. They're all in effect, and there's probably more. But none of them, I don't think, accounts for our puzzle, which is the fact that one person's making false statements at a far higher rate. That doesn't quite get captured there. And so I have a last argument. I'm going to give you a little bit of heads up warning. It involves a swear word, and that is that Trump is a bullshitter, okay? And it turns out bullshit is a technical term, I swear. This is a philosopher from Yale, Harry Frankfurt, wrote a book called On Bullshit, and he distinguishes bullshit from lying. And what's the difference? You'll recall our definition of lying was that the liar has to try and get the other person to believe something that they know is not true. Okay? So it turns out that my belief in the truth is a really important part of lying. Does that make sense? I'm trying to get you to believe something that I think is not true. Well, for bullshit, that is not a constraint. You can say anything you want, and if it's true, great. If it's not true, it doesn't matter. Okay? So that's the core definition. A liar is working actually around the truth, and the truth is a big part of it. And for a bullshitter, the truth is sort of like independent of what you're doing. It just has nothing to do with what you're trying to do. Instead, what matters is the message, the story. Okay, so the canonical case is the fisherman. He's telling this great tale of catching a fish, and the fish was, this big, right? And that's what matters, is a really great story of catching a giant fish, not whether the fish was actually this big or this big or this big. Okay? Instead, it's the telling of the story and the audience's enjoyment of the story. In Trump's case, what we see are the false statements tend to align with the core parts of his platform. So most of his false statements can be categorized as around the economy. So he very strongly overestimates how much trouble the economy is in. So most of the false statements come in there. And his thing there is about becoming a job creator. It can be about crime. So he always overstates the amount of crime that's taking place in the U.S. and your likelihood of being shot when you walk into the downtown of a city. And that fits in with the law and order thing. And the last really good example is the wall, right? We're going to make a giant wall. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to go across the whole border, and Mexico is going to pay for it. So there is no one has said that that's even possible, right? Like it's actually probably architecturally not feasible, certainly legally not feasible, right? It goes through private property. There's insane geological issues. But it doesn't matter, right? What matters is the message of we need to be strong in illegal immigration, okay? There's a great Atlantic Monthly article that came out about 2 weeks ago, and I'll summarize it in this way. Basically, it was that the press and liberals take Donald Trump literally, but not seriously. And his supporters take him seriously, but not literally. And that's a bullshit argument, okay? All right. Now, why does he do it? Right? Why not do, there's many ways to get your message across, so why maybe does Trump have to rely on this? Well, this is the other part of bullshit that Frankfurt talks about. The production of bullshit is stimulated whenever a person's obligations or opportunities to speak about some topic are more excessive than his knowledge of the facts that are relevant to the topic. Now, it is funny, but it's also, I think, a realistic assessment. Trump's main claim is that he's from outside the system. He's not a politician. He's very upfront about not prepping for debates because, he's not a politician, right? And if you've watched any of the debates, he does amazingly well for somebody that doesn't prep, right? Those questions and the amount of things that a presidential candidate is called to speak upon is intense. Like, I would fail miserably up there, okay? So I think that's why he ends up having to rely on bullshit. He has to speak for 2 minutes about something he doesn't know that much about, right? Now, I'll tell you that as a professor, I think I've probably used bullshit a few times, right? As a young professor, especially a smart student asks a great question, I don't know the answer, guess what came out of my mouth, right? Now I have new ways of dealing with that because I've been a professor for a long time. I might say something like, that's a great question. Does anybody else want to take a stab at it? And I'll sit there and try and think of a good answer that's not bullshit, okay? So this isn't that Trump is something nefarious, right? So this aspect, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, I'm trying to show that this could be a plausible explanation for the puzzle. Not to say he's a bad person necessarily, or their supporters are bad people, or anything like that. It's just trying to get at that puzzle of the lie rate and the trust. So to end on sort of a fun note and a happy note, or a funny at least note, is this book came out about a year ago, and I got it because I was interested in bullshit. And I'm reading through it, and I swear to God, this is true. You cannot make this kind of things up. He catalogs every synonym for bullshit that there is, going back through time, and develops their etymology and all this stuff. And here's one of the synonyms as I was reading the book. Not kidding. I'm sure it's purely coincidence. But here's what it's defined as: trickery and scamming. That's its initial meaning, starting around the mid-1400s. It evolves over time to be more about general nonsense and insignificance. So a fun sort of way to leave that kind of puzzle. Now, I'm often left at the end of a talk like this, where we're talking about deception and trust. I'm just like, okay, well, how do we go about telling if somebody's lying? Like you just said, there's no Pinocchio's nose. I'll tell you. Here is the secret. Are you guys ready? I think most of you guys will know who this is. Do you guys know who this guy is? Columbo, exactly. And how did Columbo tell if somebody was lying? Did he look in their eyes? No. Did he check and see if their nonverbals were different or if they had a microexpression? No. What did he do? One more thing. He asked questions. And he asked everyone questions all the time. And he often asked that other key question that would get at it. And people usually just didn't really think that much of him because he was just asking questions. So what I'm going to argue to you is the real way that we actually tell if somebody's lying to us is we ask questions. And that most of the time we should trust what other people are saying, but when you get suspicious, don't look in their eyes. That's not going to tell you anything other than they might have nice eyes. Instead, technology, which has created ways for us to lie in new ways to each other, like the Volkswagen example, has also created some of the greatest question-asking phenomena we've ever created as humans. I mean, things like Google, you couldn't even imagine 15 years ago, right? So you want to find out if somebody's telling the truth or lying? You ask questions, and not just of them, but of other people and of the information systems we've developed, all right? So good luck. Thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciated the conversation. Thanks.